Have you been looking into the concept of no self or this idea that the self is an illusion, either reading books about it or perhaps even watching videos on this channel and finding it all a little confusing? If so, my hope is that this video will be helpful to you. Hello, my friend. I hope you are well. My name is Matt Tenney. I'm the author of The Magic of Mindful Self-Awareness: How to Stop Overthinking, Clear Your Mind, and Be Happy Almost All the Time. On this channel, I help people to apply the practice of mindfulness and mindful self-awareness to be happier, less stressed, and more effective. I look forward to helping you too. One of the most popular videos on this channel is a video about how realizing that the self is an illusion is the secret to being happy in life, regardless of what happens to us. And although it's very popular and there are many, many comments that people have left about how it's helped them to wake up and be free from their egos and realize a tremendous amount of peace in their lives, there are other comments, not quite as many, but there are a number of comments from people saying that they find it all very confusing or that they just think it's complete rubbish, which is totally understandable. This is quite natural. This video is in response to a lot of questions that people have had about this concept, and hopefully it will be helpful to you if you've ever been a little confused about, well, clearly I exist as a human being, and clearly there's things happening. So what is this idea of that the self is an illusion? So let's start with some things that we probably all agree with. You know, if you're alive in a human body, there is clearly a human being that is separate from the world around it in the conventional sense of things, right? So you're not physically joined to a tree outside or to the walls of your house, right? You can move about. So you're clearly there is a separate human being that exists. There's no question about this, right? Now, what happens though is that, I don't think most of us identify with this physical body as being what I would call our true self. So, what I mean by this is most people have a belief that there is some part of them that is persisting through time, that is perhaps going to persist even after the body dies, what we call a true self or a spiritual self. And so it might be helpful to just kind of explore, well, what might that be? What could this be that we're referring to? Now, clearly, I don't think most of us think it's the body. It's somehow related to the body, but we're not exactly sure. But the language that we use about how we relate to the body is very telling. For instance, we don't say that there's a hand. We call it my hand, right? So clearly, whatever the me is, it's not the hand. It's whatever it is that's owning this hand, right? So then we even say the same thing about my heart or my brain. So even for people who think that the brain is what we are, and that when the brain goes away, we cease to exist, which could be possible. I don't think that's the case, but even if we think that, we live as though there's some me that owns the brain. We refer to it as my brain. And although you might just think this is semantics, this is actually very telling. And this is exactly how we exist. Most of the time, most people, from my experience, we exist as though there's some me that owns each distinct part of the body and is yet somehow in the body, as though the body is a vehicle of some type. And so what happens is if we try to find this me that owns the body, you'll find something very interesting. Because what the whole concept of no self is, or that the self is an illusion, is not saying that me, whatever you feel is you, that is somehow owns the body. It's not saying that that doesn't exist. What we're saying is that it's not what you think it is. And that's kind of a play on words because really, if we really reflect on what do we think we are, we live as though we are our thoughts. We live as though we are that voice inside of our heads. And this, I can say with absolute certainty, is not what you are. And there's a couple thought experiments that I think can help illustrate this. So for one, let's just imagine that in, you're sitting still, maybe you're practicing mindfulness or mindful self-awareness, and you're sitting and through grace, your mind is completely empty of thought, which for many people sounds like something that could never happen. For those of us who practice regularly, this is actually quite a common experience. There's experience happening. There's sights, there's sounds, there's smells, but there's not a single thought in the mind about these things. There's no inner voice, just silence. So let's just assume that this is happening. And then a thought comes up about ice cream. You think, oh man, I really like ice cream, the inner voice says. And then that voice goes silent, and you're once again experiencing just simply sitting with no thoughts, no visual images in the mind if your eyes are closed, no inner voice, just pure experience. So, what does this tell you about your thoughts? Well, clearly it tells you that your thoughts are not you, right? Whatever you are existed, but when the mind was empty of thought. You were clearly there when the thought was present, saying, I really like ice cream. And you were clearly there when the thought ceased to exist and the mind was empty once again. So clearly, whatever it is that is a you that we're referring to, it is not thinking. Another helpful thought experiment here is, imagine a 2 or 3 month old baby. At this age, it's almost certain that there are no thoughts going through the mind of a baby that age. There's no capacity for language, so there's clearly no inner voice in there going, "Wow, I really like baby food," or "I could use some more breast milk." That's just not happening. There's no language there. So, but isn't a 2 month old baby just as much a human as you are or as I am? Of course, it's just a small baby that hasn't developed the capacity for talking to itself yet, right? So clearly, this voice in our heads is not what we are. And what happens is if we actually practice in a way that I've talked about on the channel, talk about in the books that I've written, by simply looking at and listening to where this inner voice is coming from, it can drop away. And what's dropping away is what is commonly referred to as the ego. And that is the self that we're referring to that just doesn't exist. It's an illusion. The ego is nothing more than a bundle of thoughts and memories and habits, but it has no reality anyplace. So if you look at it, if you try to find the ego, what you find is an empty mind. So if you look right at your thoughts, if you listen to that inner voice, again, with correct practice, it drops away. And so what happens is we can actually train to experience being alive in a human body, experiencing the world in all of its miraculous beauty, both the pleasant things and the unpleasant things and the neutral things, all of it. We can experience all of that without this false sense of me being present. And so if you've heard of an awakening experience or an enlightenment experience, all that is a moment of experience, a moment of existing, being our true self. And what I mean by that is that you're always your true self. You can't be anything other than your true self. The problem is out of habit, in addition to being our true self, we attach to our ego. We believe that we are this bundle of thoughts in our heads. So when we're in a moment of being awake, a moment of enlightenment is a moment of experiencing being alive in a human body without identification with that ego as being me. It's something we either see as an object, or if it drops away, we see that it just isn't there at all. And yet existence is happening. being is happening. So this is where I think people get stuck is they hear this idea of no self or the illusion of self, and they think it means that there is no human body. Now, ultimately, one could argue that there is not there is not a human body. There's really nothing here but protons, neutrons, and electrons. But that's maybe a deeper conversation about how there's a lot of perspectives of how we can look at reality. And if you break it down into the two most simple, you just have conventional reality and ultimate reality. And in conventional reality, there's clearly a human being here. There's a table, there's a camera I'm looking into. Wherever you are, there's probably a chair you're sitting in or something you're using to listen to this or watch this. All of this in the conventional sense is happening, obviously. In the ultimate sense, there's the universe is basically energy, right? And it's just taking different shapes. So the point here is that regardless of whether you're looking at it from the conventional sense or the ultimate sense, what is really causing problems for us in terms of being happy and being free, being at peace, is that we believe we operate moment to moment as though we are the thoughts in our minds, particularly that voice in our heads that's always talking to us, always chattering away about something, usually with lots of opinions, right? And it's the degree to which that we identify with that as being me that we suffer. So if we want to experience more peace in life, more happiness, then the practice is about learning to build some stability of awareness and learning to direct that awareness to where we think that me is coming from. And it's for most of us, it feels like it's a sense of contraction right behind the eyes, inside of the head. That's where we feel the me is. And with practice, you can notice this more and more often, where you can notice what happens if you look at this space where you think the me is, it drops away. And instead of this sense of tightness and contraction behind the eyes, there's a sense of spaciousness and expansiveness. And we still exist as a human. So if your name is Susan, Susan clearly is still there. It's just Susan is a little less neurotic because Susan isn't identified with this bundle of thoughts as being me. Now, here's where people tend to get stuck next, is they say, okay, intellectually, that makes perfect sense. I can understand that I would exist just fine. I existed as a baby for months with no thoughts in my mind. Clearly, I existed. If I practice mindfulness or mindful self-awareness correctly, I can experience moments and moments each day with no thoughts, no inner voice. And not only do I still exist, but I exist in a way where I'm much happier and freer. Then the question arises, well, if I'm not my thoughts, well, who am I then? Now, I hate to be kind of a party pooper here, and not have a good answer for you, but this isn't a cop out. This is just, and it might take a while of you practicing for this to be really clear, but there's no way to describe what you are, what your true self is, your eternal self or your spiritual self. And that is because whatever that is, it's beyond words and concepts. Words and concepts can't possibly grasp what are beyond words and concepts. It's kind of like the concept of infinity. You can't describe infinity accurately. No matter what words you use, they're kind of like, fingers pointing in a direction of where the answer is, but they're not really the answer. Infinity is something the intellect cannot comprehend. It can't comprehend something without beginning and without end. In the same way, there are no words that can capture your true self, what you are beyond thoughts. However, there's some very good news, my friend, and that is that you can absolutely know your true self. You can realize your true self and become intimately familiar with your true self because it is your true self. This is who you truly are. You're not your thoughts. You're not limited to the physical body. this so with practice you can become intimately familiar with who you really are. And what happens is when you become intimately familiar with who you really are, with your true self, this physical body, the human body, its personality, its thoughts tend to become more of a reflection of your true self. And the good news, perhaps the second batch of good news here, is that your true self does not suffer. The true self is always at peace. It has no capacity for suffering. So, in any moment that you're being your true self, there is no suffering. There could very well be physical pain, there could be emotional pain, but there's no suffering. We're not adding anything to that. We can be perfectly okay with this human body experiencing physical pain, with this human body experiencing emotional pain, because we realize this isn't ultimately what we are. This is just a temporary part of what we are. Much like there's an analogy I use in the new book called The Magic of Self-Awareness, or I'm sorry, The Magic of Mindful Self-Awareness. So I use this story, it's a fictional story, but of an actress who wants to get a part in a movie and she thinks it's going to be her big break. And she's a young woman with pretty much no problems to speak of. She's very comfortable, everything's going right in her life. She seems very happy. The part that she needs to play in the movie is of a woman who just lost her job, lost her boyfriend, ends up homeless, has all types of problems. And so to prepare for this part, she studies for hours every day for months, but she really wants an extra edge. So she goes to a hypnotist and she asks to be hypnotized to believe that she's this woman, this part that she's going to play in the movie. And so the hypnotist hypnotizes her, and all of a sudden she truly believes she is this woman who has all these problems, the part that she would play in the movie. And she suffers a great deal. Now, of course, all of her suffering would end the moment the hypnotist could snap her fingers and say, "You're not the woman that you're playing in the movie. You're this young lady with no problems to speak of." Right? All of her suffering ends. And this is very much what it's like when we wake up and we realize our true self, is we realize that this experience that we're having of being alive in a human body is very much like a part that you could play in a movie. It's a temporary thing. This human body one day will die. It will become dust, dirt, transform into plants and whatever else. And this is how things naturally unfold. This is how it's supposed to be. But there's this part of us that can see all of this happening that is not affected by any of it. Maybe one more analogy would be like, if imagine if you had a really bad dream. And in the dream, when you're having it, everything seems so scary and so painful. And then you wake up and you might even have elevated heart rate and you might be sweating and then all of a sudden you start to realize, oh, it was just a dream. Now, I'm not saying that this moment necessarily is a dream, but what I am saying is that when we wake up to our true self, this is very much the realization. The realization is, oh, this whatever I am, this true self that is aware of thoughts, that can see that false sense drop away and realize that there is still existence, then it's very much like whatever's happening to this human body is a dream. Now we have to be very careful here. If you just take this as a philosophy or an intellectual exercise of some type, you could become a nihilist. You could think, well, if I'm not really this human body and that person's not really their human body, then if that's not ultimately what they are, then nothing really matters. And this is the problem with thoughts, is that thoughts create all these type of loops that confuse us. And what we're pointing to here is not creating some philosophy. I don't want you to believe this. Then it's just a bunch of bunk like anything else. You can and should verify this through your own experience. You should practice mindful self-awareness in a way, as described in other videos in this channel, as described in my book. You should practice in a way that allows you to have more and more moments of experiencing with your own direct experience What is it like to be alive in a human body without this false sense of a me that's stuck behind my eyes in my head, contracted, alone, afraid? What is it like to experience being alive in a human body with spaciousness and peace? And what you'll find is that in any moment that you're experiencing this, not only are you at peace, not only can suffering not arise, even if the physical body is experiencing physical pain or emotional pain, suffering does not arise. And it's perhaps because of that, or at least in part because of that, that you can cultivate and reflect the qualities that are most important for, for being alive on this planet. Qualities like kindness and compassion. We can respond to each moment of life with kindness and compassion. We can respond to the people around us with kindness and compassion. This is the natural effect of existing without identification with the thoughts in our head, seeing those thoughts as objects or looking at them in a way that allows them to drop and allowing the ego to drop. Either way, in any moment, as long as we're not identified with our thinking, we become more and more a reflection of our true self. And that true self is always at peace, never suffers, and only knows kindness and compassion. I hope that this video was helpful for you. If you have a question about the practice of mindfulness or mindful self-awareness, please subscribe to this channel and then leave your question as a comment in one of the videos. I'll do my best to answer your question or one like it. If you'd like a great resource for going deeper with the practice of mindfulness and mindful self-awareness, you might like my book, The Magic of Mindful Self-Awareness: How to Stop Overthinking, Clear Your Mind, and Be Happy Almost All the Time. There's a link in the description. Until next time, may you be happy and kind, my friend.